Imagine a world where people lived with nothing. No cars, no phones, no fancy clothes, no big houses, just the basics. Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what a group of ancient monks called the Desert Fathers did. They lived in the scorching deserts, far from the comfort of cities, and they did it to find something more important than material wealth, a deeper connection with God. Their world was a lot like ours. People were always asking, how can I get more? How can I find myself? How can I win friends and influence people? But the Desert Fathers had a different set of questions. They asked, what can I do without? How can I lose myself? How can I love God? These monks gave up everything to live a life of simplicity. They didn't need fancy things or a lot of money. They didn't even need to talk much. They believed that by stripping away all the distractions, they could focus on what really mattered, their relationship with God. One story tells of a wealthy man who brought a basket of gold coins to a priest in the desert. He asked the priest to give the gold to the other monks, but the priest said, "They have no need of it." The man insisted and left the basket at the church door, telling the monks to take it if they needed it. No one touched the gold, not even to look at it. The man was amazed and left with his basket, realizing that these monks had found a freedom he could never understand. The Desert Fathers showed that true freedom comes from letting go. When you don't need things, people can't control you. When you don't need to talk all the time, you can listen to the deeper things in life. When you don't need to be busy all the time, you can pray and find peace. But the story doesn't end with the Desert Fathers. Centuries later, a young man named Francis from the town of Assisi in Italy decided to follow a similar path. Francis was born into a wealthy family and used to live a life of luxury. But one day, he had a profound spiritual experience. He gave up everything he owned, even his clothes, and started living a life of poverty and joy. Francis and his followers, the Franciscans, lived close to nature and celebrated the beauty of God's creation. They sang, danced, and preached with a joy that was contagious. They believed that true happiness comes from a simple life, not from material wealth. One day, Francis and his friend Brother Maceo were eating a meager meal of dried bread and water. Francis was so happy that he kept saying, "Oh, Brother Maceo, we do not deserve such a great treasure as this." Brother Maceo was confused. "What treasure? We have nothing," Francis replied. "That's exactly the treasure living without the things that tie us down." Francis taught that true joy comes from living a life of simplicity and service. He believed that by giving up the things that control us, we can find a deeper connection with God and with each other. In the 16th century, a man named Martin Luther changed the way people thought about simplicity. He taught that true freedom comes from understanding that we are saved by grace, not by our own efforts. This freedom allows us to serve others without worrying about what we get in return. Luther said, "A Christian is a perfectly free lord of all, subject to none. A Christian is a perfectly dutiful servant of all, subject to all." John Calvin, another important figure, believed that Christians should work to create a just society. He said that leaders should rule for the benefit of their people, not for their own gain. This idea of social justice is closely tied to the idea of simplicity. When we live simply, we have more to share with those in need. In the 17th century, a young man named George Fox started a movement called the Quakers. He believed that everyone could hear the voice of Christ and that this voice should guide their lives. The Quakers lived simply, dressed plainly, and spoke honestly. They opposed injustice and fought for the rights of the poor. One of the most famous Quakers, William Penn, wrote about the need for simplicity. He said that the rich should not spend their money on luxury while the poor starved. He believed that true wealth comes from living a life of integrity and service. The story of simplicity continues to this day. People like John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, lived simply and used their resources to help others. Wesley said, "Money never stays with me. It would burn me if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it should find its way within my heart." And there are still people today who are asking the same questions the Desert Fathers asked. What can I do without? How can I lose myself? How can I love God? They are finding that the answers lead to a life of joy, freedom, and deep connection with the world around them. So, what does it mean to live a simple life in our world today? That's the question we'll explore in the next chapter. William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, was driven by a deep desire to help the most desperate and forgotten people in the industrial cities of the 19th century. He tried to bring these people into the churches, but the churches often rejected them. So, Booth took his message to the streets, using drums, tambourines, and trumpets to draw crowds. He wrote a book called In Darkest England and the Way Out, which exposed the harsh realities of life in the slums and proposed bold solutions like creating banks for the poor, rescue homes for women, and better living conditions in the suburbs. In the 20th century, Albert Schweitzer was a remarkable example of someone who dedicated his life to helping others. He was a scholar, musician, and philosopher, but he chose to spend most of his adult life as a medical missionary in Africa. Schweitzer believed that his work in Africa was a way to live out his Christian faith and make a real difference in the world. Simplicity has been a powerful force for social justice throughout history. David Livingstone, a famous missionary and explorer, fought against the African slave trade with all his might. He lived a simple life both in his inner spirit and his daily routine, and he never stopped advocating for the rights of African people. Livingstone once wrote that the horrors of the slave trade were so terrible that they couldn't even be exaggerated. Clarence Jordan, a modern-day hero, founded Koinonia Farm in the United States and wrote a version of the New Testament called The Cotton Patch. He lived a simple life and stood up against racism and violence, even when it meant facing threats and attacks. Jordan believed that true Christian faith meant living simply and working for peace and equality. Today, there are many groups that continue to fight for justice, inspired by Christian values. The Barclay Christian Coalition, Voice of Calvary, Jubilee Fellowship, the Catholic Worker Movement, and the People's Christian Coalition are just a few examples. These groups publish magazines and work in their communities to promote simplicity and social justice. Throughout history, many people have written about the importance of simplicity in Christian life. From ancient texts like Clement's The Rich Man's Salvation, to modern works like Ronald Sider's Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, these writings remind us that living simply is not just a personal choice, but a way to make the world a better place. One of the key messages from these stories is that living simply means caring for others and the environment. Timothy Weiskell, an environmental ethicist, argues that we need a new way of thinking about growth and progress. He believes that our current focus on constant growth is leading us to ecological disaster. We need a theological revolution that recognizes the limits of the earth and speaks to the needs of those left behind by our current system. Weiskell draws on the story of King Belshazzar from the Bible, where the king's excess and disregard for the true source of his power led to his downfall. This story is a warning that we must change our ways if we want to survive as a species. We need to recognize that we are part of a larger, natural story, and that our actions have consequences for the world around us. Father Tom Berry, an influential theologian, reminds us that we are part of a vast, evolving universe. We are at a critical point in human history, and our beliefs and actions will determine the future. We can choose to continue on the path of unchecked growth, which Berry calls the Tektozoic, or we can choose a path that respects the natural world, which he calls the Ecozoic. The message is clear. Living simply is not just about personal virtue. It is about creating a just and sustainable world. As Francis de Sales once said, "In everything, love simplicity." This simple idea can guide us in making choices that benefit not only ourselves, but also the world around us. The journey of humans from small, scattered groups to massive urban centers is a story that spans thousands of years. For most of our history, humans lived in small communities, hunting and gathering for survival. This way of life changed dramatically about 12,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture. Farming allowed people to settle in one place, grow food, and support larger populations. As these settlements grew, they eventually became the cities we know today. However, this transition to urban life has not been without its challenges. Throughout history, cities have often faced ecological disasters. Rapid deforestation, depletion of water resources, soil erosion, and the spread of diseases are just a few of the problems that have plagued urban areas. These issues have sometimes led to the collapse of entire cities or civilizations. For example, ancient cities in Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley faced severe environmental degradation, which contributed to their decline. To survive these challenges, cities often tried to dominate nearby rural areas, securing resources and forming alliances, or even waging wars with other cities. This competition for resources has been a recurring theme in human history, leading to the formation of city-states, kingdoms, and empires. The environmental impact of these conflicts has been significant, with tactics like burning fields and salting the earth used to destroy the ecological base of enemies. Demographic historians have studied these patterns of population growth and collapse, noting that human populations tend to expand and then face catastrophic declines. These cycles, known as millennial long waves, show that populations are both resilient and unstable. After a collapse, populations often bounce back stronger, but the frequency of these cycles has increased over time. This suggests that the pressure on the environment is growing, and the consequences of overuse are becoming more severe. The industrial era marked a significant shift in human history. With new technologies, humans were able to harness more energy, leading to rapid population growth. Between 1700 and 1950, the world's population doubled, and by 1950, it had doubled again. This growth was unprecedented, and it has continued to accelerate. By the late 20th century, the world's population was growing at a rate of 2% per year, a pace that was unsustainable. One of the most striking aspects of this population growth is the rapid urbanization that has accompanied it. In 1700, only about 10% of the world's population lived in cities. By 1950, this had risen to 30%, and today, more than half of the world's population lives in urban areas. Cities have grown from small towns to massive metropolises, with some cities now home to millions of people. This rapid urbanization has put immense pressure on the environment, leading to resource depletion, increased pollution, and a decline in public health. Despite these challenges, there is a widespread belief that technology and economic growth will solve our environmental problems. This belief, often referred to as growthism, is deeply ingrained in modern culture. The idea is that continued economic growth will eventually lift everyone out of poverty and create a better future. However, this belief has been criticized by many who argue that unlimited growth is not sustainable and that it is leading to environmental collapse. The pursuit of the good life in many Western countries is often defined by high levels of consumption. This consumer culture has been criticized for its environmental impact, as the production and disposal of goods contribute to pollution and resource depletion. While some individuals and communities have made efforts to reduce their environmental footprint, the underlying economic system still prioritizes growth. Political leaders and economic institutions continue to promote policies that encourage consumption and expansion, often at the expense of the environment. The environmental crisis we face today is not just a technical problem. It is a cultural and spiritual one. Many religious and philosophical traditions are beginning to re-examine their teachings in light of the ecological challenges we face. Some argue that the Judeo-Christian tradition, with its emphasis on human dominion over nature, has contributed to our exploitative relationship with the environment. However, other ancient civilizations also faced similar ecological problems, suggesting that the issue is not unique to any one culture. To address these challenges, we need a fundamental shift in our values and beliefs. This shift involves rethinking our relationship with the environment and recognizing that our well-being is deeply interconnected with the health of the planet. Some theologians and environmentalists are proposing new ways of understanding concepts like stewardship and responsibility, emphasizing the need for a more sustainable and equitable approach to living. The future of our species depends on our ability to make this shift. The challenges we face are complex and require a holistic approach that addresses both the environmental and social dimensions of our problems. Only by changing our cultural beliefs and practices can we hope to create a world that is sustainable and just for all. The world we live in is like a grand feast, but the handwriting on the wall is clear. Our way of life is heading towards a crisis. The story of Belshazzar's feast in the Bible is a powerful metaphor for our current situation. Belshazzar, a king who ignored the warning signs, was not spared despite his eventual understanding. Similarly, we might finally realize the gravity of our environmental impact, but the damage may already be too great to reverse. We have learned that the Judeo-Christian tradition is more complex than we once thought, and other cultures have also been exploitative of their environments. But this knowledge hasn't led to significant changes in how we treat the earth. The real issue is our public theology of Grautham, the belief that endless economic growth is the key to happiness and prosperity. This belief is deeply rooted in our culture and is driving us towards ecological disaster. Our ecological impact is vast. Chemicals like PCBs, which are harmful to health, have been found in penguins in Antarctica, showing how far our actions can reach. At the same time, our sense of community is shrinking. We are more connected than ever through technology, but we feel less connected to each other and to the natural world. This disconnect is dangerous because it means we are less likely to act responsibly towards the environment. Religion and ethics can play a crucial role in addressing this crisis, but they must evolve. Historically, religious identities have often been used to justify ignoring or persecuting those outside the moral community. To survive, we need to expand our sense of community to include all of humanity and the natural world. This is a tall order, but it is essential. Environmental ethics is about more than just protecting nature. It's about building a sense of belonging to a global life process. We need to recognize that we are part of a larger system and that our actions have consequences. This sense of belonging should inspire us to live more sustainably and to care for the earth and all its inhabitants. However, there is a risk in thinking that humans are the center of the universe, or that we can control nature. Some new creation theologies suggest that humans are co-creators with God, but this can lead to an exaggerated sense of our power and responsibility. While it's important to understand how we can positively impact the environment, we must also recognize our limits. We can't predict or control global climate change, new diseases, or the complex interactions within ecosystems. For example, we can't increase the photosynthetic efficiency of plants, and we already use a significant portion of the Earth's photosynthetic output. If we continue to grow at the current rate, we will face catastrophic consequences. We need to build societies that are resilient and can adapt to the challenges ahead, rather than relying on the illusion that we can control everything. The tension between human societies and natural ecosystems is at the root of our environmental problems. Human societies often prioritize growth and production, while ecosystems prioritize balance and sustainability. This conflict is built into our nature, and it's not something we can easily change. The only way forward is to step back and see ourselves as part of a larger system. This perspective is at the heart of both religious and scientific inquiry. The story of Belshazzar's feast warns us that even if we understand the problem, it might be too late to avoid the consequences. This is a harsh message, but it's important to face it. We need to be honest about our limits and the challenges ahead. For those of us who have benefited from the current system, this is a difficult pill to swallow. But for the majority of the world's population, the experience of human limits and divine presence will be much harsher. In the coming decades, our theologies and worldviews will likely undergo radical transformations. The comfortable narratives of oneness with nature may not be enough. We need to be prepared for a more challenging and perhaps darker understanding of our place in the world. This doesn't mean we should give up hope, but it does mean we need to be realistic and take action now to build a more sustainable and just world. William James, in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, delves into the depths of human experience exploring how different people experience and understand their connection to the divine. He argues that religious experiences are not just matters of belief, but are deeply personal and often raw. James's work challenges readers to consider the role of personal experience in shaping one's faith and worldview. For many, this book has been a cornerstone in understanding the psychological and philosophical aspects of religion. Dr. Calvin DeWitt has always had a deep love for the natural world. From a young age, he was fascinated by the creatures around him, and this passion has only grown stronger over the years. As a professor of environmental studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. DeWitt not only teaches about the importance of environmental stewardship, but also lives it every day. He and his wife live on an island in the Wauwbessa Marsh, where they have turned their home into a living laboratory for students and researchers. Dr. DeWitt's commitment to environmental care is rooted in his faith. He believes that the Bible is not just a guide for spiritual life, but also an ecological handbook. According to Dr. DeWitt, the Bible provides powerful teachings on how to live in harmony with the earth and its creatures. He often shares these teachings with his students and, through his writing, emphasizing that caring for creation is a fundamental part of being a follower of Christ. One of the key principles Dr. DeWitt highlights is the idea that just as God sustains and keeps us, we must also sustain and keep God's creation. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, God places Adam in the Garden of Eden with the task of serving and keeping it. The Hebrew words used here, abad, serve, and shamar, keep, are rich with meaning. Abad suggests a role of service, where we are called to meet the needs of the garden so that it can flourish. Shamar, on the other hand, implies a loving and caring form of keeping, ensuring that the garden remains healthy and vibrant. Dr. Dewitt draws a parallel between this biblical mandate and the way we should care for the earth today. Just as we ask God to keep us in our worship, invoking the Aaronic blessing, we should also strive to keep the creation around us. This means protecting the land, water, and air, and ensuring that all creatures can thrive in their natural habitats. It's a call to action that goes beyond simply avoiding harm. It's about actively nurturing and restoring the environment. Another principle Dr. Dewitt emphasizes is the importance of being disciples of Jesus Christ, the Creator, Sustainer, and Reconciler of all things. Jesus is described in the Bible as the one through whom all things were made, and through whom all things are being reconciled. As followers of Christ, we are called to emulate His example of love and care for the world. This means not only caring for our fellow human beings, but also for the entire created order. The concept of the Sabbath is another key principle in Dr. Dewitt's teachings. In the Old Testament, God commands His people to set aside one day in 7 as a day of rest. This Sabbath rest is not just for people, but for animals and the land as well. The land is to lie fallow every 7th year, allowing it to rejuvenate and restore itself. Dr. Dewitt sees this as a profound principle that extends beyond agriculture to all aspects of creation. It's a reminder that the earth needs time to heal, and that we must not exploit its resources without giving it the chance to recover. Dr. Dewitt also stresses the importance of enjoying creation without destroying it. God's creation is full of beauty and abundance, and we are invited to partake in its fruitfulness. However, we must do so responsibly, ensuring that we do not deplete the resources that other creatures depend on. This means being mindful of our consumption and taking steps to preserve the biodiversity of the earth. Just as Noah cared for the animals on the ark, we must care for the species that are threatened by human activity. True contentment is another principle that Dr. Dewitt finds in the Bible. The pursuit of more and more material wealth often leads to environmental degradation. Instead, we are called to find contentment in what we have and to focus on the things that truly matter. This doesn't mean living in poverty, but rather living in a way that honors God and respects the limits of the earth. By seeking contentment, we can reduce our impact on the environment and allow creation to heal and flourish. Finally, Dr. Dewitt emphasizes the importance of putting our beliefs into practice. It's not enough to know what God requires of us. We must also act on that knowledge. The Bible is full of examples of people who heard God's word but did not put it into practice. We are called to be doers of the word, not just hearers. This means making changes in our daily lives, whether it's reducing our energy consumption, supporting sustainable practices, or advocating for policies that protect the environment. For Dr. Dewitt, environmental stewardship is not just a set of abstract principles, but a way of life. He believes that by living out these principles, we can make a real difference in the world and honor the God who created it. His work is a powerful reminder that faith and environmental care are deeply intertwined, and that our actions today can have a lasting impact on the future of the earth. In a world where we often feel lost and overwhelmed, the idea of simplicity can be a refreshing breath of fresh air. Simplicity is more than just living with fewer things. It's about finding a deeper sense of peace and purpose. When we embrace simplicity, we discover a place where love and joy flourish. This journey begins in our hearts and minds, and it changes the way we live our lives. Imagine a place where you feel truly at home, where you don't have to worry about what others think or what you don't have. This is the valley of love and delight. When we find this place, we realize that true happiness doesn't come from material things, but from a deeper connection with ourselves and others. We learn to be humble and flexible, not ashamed to bend and adapt to life's challenges. This turning and adjusting becomes a joy, and as we keep turning, we find ourselves in the right place, living the right way. Simplicity starts with a clear focus in our hearts. When we have a strong inner sense of purpose, it changes how we live. Our words become honest, and we no longer crave status or fancy things. We stop showing off and start sharing what we have with others. This isn't about not being able to afford things. It's about choosing to live by principles that matter. We learn that we can live deeply and meaningfully without a lot of stuff, just like Richard E. Byrd discovered during his time alone in the Arctic. But in our modern world, it's hard to find this kind of simplicity. We're pulled in many directions, making decisions based on what others think or what we fear. We lack a clear center, and this lack of focus leads us to cling to things for security. We buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like. We're made to feel ashamed if we don't keep up with the latest trends. This way of living is unhealthy, and it's time to wake up and see that following a sick society makes us sick too. The Bible teaches us a lot about simplicity. It's not just about individual choices. It's about how we live together as a community. The Bible is clear that wealth and possessions can be dangerous. It warns us not to put our trust in money or material things. The earth and everything in it belong to God, and we are just stewards of what He has given us. The year of Jubilee in the Old Testament was a time when land and wealth were redistributed to ensure that everyone had what they needed. This idea challenges the way we think about property and wealth today. Jesus spoke often about the dangers of wealth. He said that it's hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God, and He taught that we can't serve both God and money. He told stories like the parable of the rich fool who stored up his wealth but lost his soul. Jesus encouraged His followers to sell their possessions and give to the poor, to trust in God's provision, and to live without worry. The early Christian community took these teachings seriously. They shared what they had and lived together in a way that reflected God's love and justice. This is the kind of simplicity we need today. It's not about living in poverty or denying ourselves the good things in life. It's about finding a balance where we can enjoy what we have without being controlled by it. Simplicity is about trust. When we trust God, we don't worry about what we'll eat or wear. We know that God will provide for our needs. This trust frees us from anxiety and allows us to live joyfully. We can receive what we have as a gift from God, knowing that He is the one who cares for us. We can share what we have with others, knowing that God will take care of us too. Living this way isn't always easy, but it's worth it. When we seek God's kingdom first, everything else falls into place. We find a deeper sense of purpose and peace. We learn to live in a way that honors God and blesses others. This is the true gift of simplicity. When we talk about simplicity, it's not just about having a clear mind or a peaceful heart. It's also about how we live our lives in the real world. The way we act and the choices we make show what's really important to us. If we only talk about simplicity but don't live it, it's like having a beautiful idea that never becomes real. So, let's look at some ways we can live a simpler life that reflects what we believe. First, when you buy things, think about what you really need. For example, when you're choosing a car, pick one that works well and is reliable, not one that makes you look cool. When you're looking for a place to live, focus on how comfortable and practical it is, not how fancy it looks to others. The same goes for clothes. Instead of following the latest trends, buy clothes that you need and that last a long time. John Wesley, a famous Christian leader, said he always bought the most durable and plain clothes. He believed in using things wisely and not wasting money on things that don't matter. Second, be careful about anything that feels like it's controlling you. If you find yourself addicted to something like watching too much TV, spending too much time on your phone, or always needing to buy new things, try to break free. Addiction is when something has power over you, and you can't stop even if you want to. But you can ask for help from God and from people who care about you. Giving away some of your things or money can also make you feel free. It's a way to show that you're not controlled by your possessions. Third, try to give things away more often. If you have something you really like, but don't need to think about giving it to someone who could use it. One time, I gave away a bike that meant a lot to me, and it felt amazing. My son, Nathan, even gave his lunchbox to a friend who needed one. Giving can make you feel good and help others at the same time. Fourth, don't let companies convince you that you need the latest gadgets. Most of these things don't really save time and often just break down, causing more trouble. Kids often have more fun with simple toys or even playing with household items. Think about the impact on the environment too. The US uses a lot of energy, but we don't need to keep buying more and more stuff. Choose things that are good for the planet and for people. Fifth, learn to enjoy things without owning them. In our culture, we think we need to own everything to be happy. But you can enjoy the beach, parks, and libraries without owning them. Sharing things with others can be just as fun and can help build community. Sixth, spend time in nature. Go for walks, listen to birds, and feel the grass and leaves. Appreciate the beauty around you. The Bible says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." When you connect with nature, you can feel closer to God and to the world. Seventh, be careful about buying things on credit. It's easy to get into debt, but it can make you feel trapped. The Bible talks about the dangers of debt and usury, charging interest. Jesus taught his followers to lend without expecting anything in return. Be smart about money and avoid unnecessary debt. Eighth, always be honest in what you say. Jesus said to just say yes or no and not to make promises you can't keep. Avoid flattery and half-truths. When you speak honestly, you build trust with others. If your words come from a place of faith, you won't need to complicate things. Ninth, avoid anything that hurts others. John Woolman, a Quaker, lived a life that didn't harm anyone. He was against things like luxury and greed because they often lead to oppression. Think about whether your choices might be unfair to others. For example, are the products you buy made by people who are treated poorly? Do you treat others with respect, or do you sometimes act in ways that make them feel less important? Try to live in a way that shows love and fairness to everyone. 10th, keep God as your main focus. It's easy to get distracted by things like your job, status, or family. But if you keep God at the center of your life, you'll stay grounded. George Fox, a Quaker leader, warned that if you let your mind get too focused on your job or other things, you might lose sight of God. When you keep God first, you'll be able to handle whatever comes your way. Living a simple life isn't about following a set of rules. It's about making choices that reflect what you believe and that help you and others. When you live this way, you'll find a deeper sense of peace and purpose. As we wrap up our journey through the ideas of McDaniel, Highwater, Elgin, Baca, and Sherrard, we can see that they all point to a common theme: the importance of recognizing our interconnectedness with the world around us and living a life of compassion and simplicity. McDaniel and Highwater remind us that understanding and valuing our connections to others and to nature can lead to a more compassionate way of living. When Jesus taught us to love our neighbors as ourselves, he was emphasizing the importance of seeing ourselves as part of a larger community. This means caring for others and the environment, not just ourselves. Elgin highlights the Western view of reality, which has often seen the world as a collection of separate parts rather than a connected whole. This view has led to significant achievements in science and technology, but it has also contributed to environmental and social problems. By recognizing our interdependence, we can start to address these issues and create a more balanced and sustainable world. Baca challenges us to rethink some of the beliefs that have shaped our worldview, such as dualism, hierarchy, anthropocentrism, and an otherworldly orientation. These beliefs can lead to a lack of care for the earth and for others. By moving away from these ideas, we can develop a more holistic and compassionate approach to life. Sherrard's work on sacred cosmology suggests that our understanding of the world should be rooted in a deep spiritual and ecological awareness. This means seeing the earth as a sacred and living entity, not just a resource to be exploited. Together, these thinkers encourage us to live more simply and compassionately. Simplicity isn't about denying ourselves or living in poverty. It's about finding a way to live that is in harmony with the earth and with others. It's about recognizing that our well-being is tied to the well-being of the planet and all its inhabitants. So how can we apply these ideas in our daily lives? We can start by being more mindful of our actions and their impact on the world around us. We can choose to consume less and waste less, and we can support practices and policies that promote sustainability and social justice. We can also cultivate a sense of community and connection, both with other people and with nature. Ultimately, the path to a more compassionate and sustainable world starts with each of us. By changing our own attitudes and behaviors, we can inspire others to do the same. Together, we can create a world that is more just, more loving, and more in tune with the beauty and mystery of life.